I'm not asking for mercy, for I find it somewhat absurd to ask for mercy for something I did not do. So I will be tortured for and will suffer for.
To many who knew him, Ted Bundy was the picture of normalcy, a clean-cut law student with charm, intelligence, and ambition. Friends and colleagues saw a man with a bright future, someone you'd trust instantly. But beneath that polished surface was a chilling truth. Bundy was one of the most infamous serial killers in American history, responsible for the brutal murders of dozens of young women during the 1970s. His story has been told and retold through documentaries, books, and films. People dissect his crimes, his manipulations, and even his courtroom theatrics. But there's a part of Bundy's life that's rarely spoken about, something far removed from the horror of his killings. In 1982, while on death row in Florida, Ted Bundy became a father. His daughter was born into a world where her father's name was synonymous with fear, violence, and evil. She was innocent, yet forever tied to a legacy she never chose. Today, decades after Bundy's execution, the question still lingers. Whatever happened to Ted Bundy's child? And how has she managed to live in the shadow of such a notorious name? Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His beginnings were marked by secrecy. For the first several years of his life, Ted believed his grandparents were his parents, and that his mother, Louise, was his older sister. This web of lies was meant to protect the family from the stigma of unwed motherhood in the 1940s, but it left Bundy with deep feelings of betrayal and confusion when he eventually discovered the truth. In the early 1950s, Louise moved with Ted across the country to Tacoma, Washington, where she later married a man named Johnny Bundy, a hospital cook. Ted took his stepfather's name, but never warmed to him. Family friends later said Ted looked down on Johnny, considering him beneath the life he imagined for himself. As a boy, Ted seemed quiet and intelligent, but there were troubling glimpses of darker impulses. Neighbors remembered him wandering the streets alone at night, peering into windows. Others recalled how he enjoyed reading detective magazines, particularly the sections about violent crimes. His aunt once claimed she awoke to find young Ted standing by her bed, calmly holding knives from the kitchen. Despite these unsettling moments, Bundy was largely seen as a bright student. In high school, he was socially awkward and shy, but classmates remembered his sharp intelligence. Later, at the University of Washington, he studied psychology and impressed his professors with his articulate insights. And if you are into classic Hollywood icons, amazing stories, and newly discovered insights, then hit that subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers, and your support will mean a lot to our channel. Bundy carefully crafted an image of the perfect young man. He dressed neatly, spoke with confidence, and even volunteered for political campaigns. A former co-worker once said, "Ted was polite, helpful, and charming. He was the last person you'd ever suspect of anything sinister." Friends and acquaintances described him as ambitious, disciplined, and eager to be admired. He could appear shy and reserved one moment, then magnetic and persuasive the next. It was this duality, the ability to mask his true self, that would later make him so dangerous. By the early 1970s, Bundy seemed destined for success. He was handsome, studying law, and involved in politics. But beneath the polished exterior, a much darker life was about to unfold, one that would shock the nation and reveal him not as the boy next door, but as one of the most prolific killers in American history. In the early 1970s, Ted Bundy's carefully constructed image of a promising law student and charming young man hid a terrifying reality. To the outside world, he was ambitious, clean-cut, and even inspiring. But in secret, he had already begun a killing spree that would stretch across multiple states. Bundy's methods were chilling in their simplicity. He often feigned injury, wearing a sling or pretending to struggle with crutches, then asked young women for help carrying books or loading items into his tan Volkswagen Beetle. Once lured close, the women were attacked and abducted. His victims were usually college-aged, attractive, and often resembled one another with long hair parted down the middle. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy is confirmed to have murdered more than 30 women, though experts believe the true number could be far higher. His crimes were marked by violence, control, and cruelty. He moved across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and finally Florida, leaving behind a trail of disappearances that baffled authorities. The contrast between his public and private lives was almost unbelievable. By day, Bundy studied law and volunteered at a crisis hotline in Seattle, where he was remembered as compassionate and calm. His co-worker, true crime author Ann Rule, later wrote, "There was absolutely nothing to indicate he was anything but a kind young man who genuinely cared for people in trouble. Few could imagine that the same man comforting callers at night was the one terrorizing women across the Pacific Northwest." Bundy's double life began to crumble in 1975, when he was arrested in Utah after police found burglary tools in his car. Soon, detectives began to connect him to a growing list of unsolved disappearances. But Bundy was cunning and manipulative. Twice he managed to escape custody, once by jumping out of a courthouse window in Colorado, and later by cutting through the ceiling of his cell. During his second escape in 1977, he fled to Florida, and the killings began again. In January 1978, Bundy carried out one of his most notorious attacks at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. 2 young women were murdered in their sleep, and several others were brutally assaulted. Just weeks later, he kidnapped and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, his final known victim. Bundy was arrested once more in February 1978. This time, there would be no escape. His trial became a media circus, the first nationally televised trial of its kind. Bundy relished the attention, often acting as his own attorney. He flashed smiles to the cameras, cross-examined witnesses, and seemed to enjoy the stage as much as the proceedings. The contrast was grotesque. A man accused of horrific crimes playing to the public as if it were a performance. By the end of the 1970s, the mask was gone. The charming law student had been unmasked as one of America's most sadistic killers. And yet, even as his crimes horrified the nation, Bundy continued to manipulate those around him, setting the stage for the strange and controversial chapter of his marriage and fatherhood while awaiting execution. As Ted Bundy's trial in Florida unfolded, the courtroom became the stage not only for justice, but also for one of the most bizarre chapters of his life, his marriage and the birth of his only known child. Bundy first met Carol Ann Boone in the early 1970s when they both worked at the Washington State Department of Emergency Services. Boone found him charming, supportive, and kind, and over time she convinced herself of his innocence, even as the evidence against him grew overwhelming. By the time of his Florida trial in 1979, Boone had moved across the country to stand by his side. She testified for him, visited him regularly in prison, and defended him to reporters. Many observers were stunned at her loyalty, but for Bundy, it was an opportunity to maintain control and project an image of stability. In 1980, Bundy staged a bizarre courtroom marriage proposal. Exploiting a Florida legal loophole that allowed couples to marry by declaring their vows in front of a judge, Bundy asked Boone to marry him while she was testifying. When she agreed, the marriage became official on the spot, in front of the jury, the judge, and the nation. Soon after, Boone became pregnant. Rose Bundy was born in 1981 or 1982, even though Florida prisons officially banned conjugal visits. Boone later admitted in interviews that guards often look the other way, allowing her and Bundy to be intimate. The Netflix docuseries Conversations with a Killer revealed Boone's own words, while the film Extremely Wicked shockingly evil and vile, dramatized the event as a clandestine encounter behind a vending machine. Bundy, ever the manipulator, embraced fatherhood as part of his performance. He posed as a doting husband and father, holding Rose during prison visits and writing affectionate letters. Yet many believed it was just another act, another mask for the cameras and for Boone's benefit. Over time, the cracks appeared. Boone reportedly began her relationship with Bundy while he was still technically involved with his longtime girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, a betrayal that underscored his manipulative nature. And as Bundy's appeals failed and he finally confessed to dozens of murders, Boone's faith in him collapsed. In 1986, she officially divorced Bundy and cut off all contact. When Bundy tried to reach her one last time with a phone call before his execution in 1989, she refused to answer. By then, she had disappeared with Rose, determined to erase any link to the man the world knew as a monster. On October 24, 1981 or 1982, accounts differ, Ted Bundy and Carol Ann Boone welcomed their daughter, Rose Bundy, into the world. She was conceived while her father was on death row in Florida, a fact that shocked the public since conjugal visits were officially forbidden. How it happened remains a mix of truth and rumor. In the Netflix series Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, Boone herself admitted that prison guards didn't really care about the couple's intimacy. The 2019 film Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, even dramatized the moment as a secret rendezvous behind a vending machine. Regardless of the exact circumstances, it was clear that Bundy used charm and manipulation to bend prison rules, just as he had bent people to his will his entire life. For a time, Boone brought Rose to visit her father. Bundy would hold her, pose for photographs, and act the part of a doting dad. But as his appeals crumbled and he began confessing to dozens of murders, Boone's faith collapsed. In 1986, she divorced Bundy and reportedly refused to take his final phone call before his execution in 1989. By then, she had cut off all contact between Rose and her father. At the time of the divorce, Rose would have been around 4 or 5 years old. By Bundy's execution, she was 7 or 8, still too young to fully understand who her father was or why the world reviled his name. Some speculate that Boone shielded her daughter completely, leaving Rose unaware of Bundy's true identity until much later in life. After Bundy's confessions, Boone quietly left Florida and returned with Rose to Washington State. From there, the trail goes cold. Some rumors suggest Boone later moved them to Oklahoma and even remarried, which would mean Rose may have grown up with a stepfather, a chance at a more stable family life away from Bundy's shadow. By all accounts, Rose had minimal contact with her father in his final years, if any at all. Though a handful of unverified photos of Bundy, Boone, and Rose circulate online, credible sources agree Boone stopped visiting him before his execution. In later years, Bundy's former co-worker and true crime author Ann Rule, who knew Bundy personally, gave rare insight into Rose's possible fate. In the 2008 edition of her book, The Stranger Beside Me, Rule wrote, "I have heard that Ted's daughter is a kind and intelligent young woman, but I have no idea where she and her mother may live. They have been through enough pain." On her website, she added, "All I know is that Ted's daughter has grown up to be a fine young woman." Rule deliberately avoided investigating further, saying the family deserved privacy. Today, Rose Bundy would be in her early 40s. It is believed that Boone changed both her name and her daughters to protect them, allowing Rose to grow up away from the infamy of Bundy's crimes. Whether she married, started a family of her own, or continues to live in secrecy, Rose has chosen silence, perhaps the only way to escape the weight of a legacy she never asked for. By the late 1980s, Ted Bundy had exhausted every appeal. After years of denying his guilt, he began confessing to dozens of murders in the days leading up to his execution, a chilling attempt to delay the inevitable. On January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison, Bundy was executed in the electric chair. He was 42 years old. The atmosphere outside the prison was unlike anything seen before. Crowds of people gathered through the night, some holding signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." Vendors sold T-shirts and buttons. When the word spread that Bundy was dead, the crowd erupted in cheers, treating the event more like a festival than an execution. It was a moment that captured both the horror of his crimes and the collective relief at his end. Inside, however, it was a very different story. Bundy had no family present at his execution. By then, Carol Ann Boone had cut all ties with him and disappeared with their daughter Rose. His mother, Louise, reportedly struggled with the truth until the end, torn between a mother's love and the monstrous reality of her son's crimes. Bundy's body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location in Washington State, the place where many of his crimes began. For the public, his execution was the closing of a nightmarish chapter. For his daughter, it was the beginning of a lifetime of silence and secrecy. Ted Bundy's name remains etched into the darkest corners of American history. Decades after his execution, his story continues to fascinate and horrify through books, documentaries, and films. Netflix's Conversations with a Killer exposed his manipulations in his own words, while the film Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, starring Zac Efron, reintroduced Bundy's story to a new generation, focusing on his relationships and the women caught in his orbit. For better or worse, Bundy has become a macabre cultural icon, a reminder that evil can hide behind charm and a smile. But while Bundy's story has been retold endlessly, his daughter's life has followed the opposite path. Rose Bundy, conceived behind prison walls and raised in secrecy, has lived her life in silence. After Carol Ann Boone divorced Bundy in 1986, rejected his last call before execution, and vanished with Rose, the trail went cold. Some believe Boone moved back to Washington State, while others claim she relocated to Oklahoma and remarried, possibly giving Rose a stepfather and a chance at a more stable family life. By all credible accounts, Rose has lived under a new identity. She has never given an interview, never sought publicity, and never claimed her father's legacy. The few who have spoken of her paint a picture of resilience. In the 2008 edition of The Stranger Beside Me, Bundy's former co-worker and author Ann Rule wrote, "I have heard that Ted's daughter is a kind and intelligent young woman, but I have no idea where she and her mother may live. They have been through enough pain." On her website, she added, "All I know is that Ted's daughter has grown up to be a fine young woman." Today, Rose would be in her early 40s. Whether she has married, started her own family, or continues to live in anonymity, she has succeeded in doing what Bundy never could, disappearing from the spotlight. And that may be the final contradiction. Ted Bundy's legacy is one of infamy, manipulation, and horror. Rose's, on the other hand, is one of survival, of reclaiming a life that was never truly hers to begin with, and living it far from the shadow of her father's name. Ted Bundy's story is one of deception, cruelty, and death. A man who fooled the world with charm while committing unspeakable crimes. His name remains etched into the darkest pages of American history, retold endlessly through books, films, and documentaries. But hidden in that story is another, quieter life, that of his daughter Rose. While Bundy sought attention until the very end, Rose chose silence. In her anonymity, she found the one thing her father could never give her: freedom from his shadow. And maybe that is the final contradiction. While Bundy's legacy is one of infamy, his daughter's story is about survival, resilience, and the courage to live unseen. But what do you think? Should the children of notorious criminals be left entirely in peace, or will history always follow them? If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For for more deep dives into the untold stories behind the headlines.